One thing that we always see in the springtime is that we see 134 programs, no matter where we are with Power Four, or if you're in the group of five, you see a bunch of programs in the FBS that come in with new hopes and new dreams. But sometimes those new hopes and new dreams might shine a little bit brighter in one place than maybe it would normally would in a different place. And boy, is there some light to be shined at the lower levels of college football here tonight. Welcome to the Any Given Saturday podcast, where anything could happen on any given Saturday. Usually a lot of love is given to those power conference teams, the SEC, the Big Ten, the conferences that when you think about these conferences, you can't think about not writing the college football story without these particular conferences. But just because some conference might not be able to be a part of that story, or at least maybe not be a main chapter in a book of the history of college football, does not mean that it's not less important. And we look down at the group of five here today, and there's a lot of intriguing things happening in the group of five, especially this time of year. We have coaching carousel in full effect in the group of five. We have conference realignments happening at the moment. We also have a new installment of my program rankings going into 2024. So we have all that coming your way shortly. It's going to be a fun one, especially if you are a fan of a group of five team. This one is for you guys. I'm here for the little guys here today. So if you're excited for all of that and you're excited for so much more than that, I need you guys to go ahead and do a couple of favors for me. Go ahead, smack that like button, hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new. If you happen to be brand new, of course, many of you that are watching either the full podcast or watching the videos that come out on the channel, you guys aren't subscribed. And all I'm asking is, why? What are we doing? It only takes a few seconds. You have a chance to be an A1 since day one. See the size of our channel. We're not afraid to mention that our channel is not very big. We don't have a lot of clout on the internet, but you have an opportunity to be an A1 since day one. You could really make that happen for us here tonight. So lots of fun, especially for that group of five right now. But before we get into any of that, we got to address the elephant in the room. We are gathered here today witnessing the death of the NCAA as we know it. And it's a somber day for those of you that have been following what's going on between the Tennessee lawyers and the NCAA lawyers. If you are a bootlicker, I'm just joking, or am I? So we know what has happened with the NCAA. For years, we have seen the NCAA resist change as much as humanly possible. We truly have. The NCAA for years has not given up an inch in terms of how what we think of our student athletes. Should our student athletes be compensated for their name, image, and likeness, and some other miscellaneous things for what we got going on in terms of the situation with the NCAA. But the NCAA went to court, and what they found out extremely quickly is that Tennessee had time today. Tennessee absolutely had time today. So Tennessee and the NCAA, they did battle it out in court, out in Greenville, Tennessee. And once again, the NCAA does have to hold yet another L. Last Friday, we did see a federal judge out in Greenville, Tennessee, barred the organization, the NCAA, from enforcing its rules prohibiting name, image, and likeness compensation for recruits by granting a preliminary injunction that was demanded by the states of Tennessee and Virginia. Now, this is another big loss for the NCAA because if you remember back from late in the fall, early winter, we had a similar battle happening, but it was based on the transfer rules being enforced by the NCAA and whether the NCAA can make someone sit out a year just because they transfer multiple times throughout the course of their college career. And what we saw is that the NCAA turns out they can't do that now, can they? So what we've seen the NCAA do is they are not able to enforce its rules on the transfer portal. They're also not able to enforce its rules on name, image, and likeness. And it's a big blow for the NCAA. And it also begs the question in terms of, do we see the floodgates being opened in multiple fronts going forward and going backwards in a sense, right? So going forward, do we see more situations to where NIL is more prevalent in recruiting for these high school athletes, not just necessarily in football, but in other sports too on a smaller scale? Football, of course, being the biggest sport in America, at least in the collegiate athletic space. Football is one of the biggest, right? Could we see high school recruits being directly contacted by collectives? Could we see, coaches almost negotiate with these future student athletes in terms of, okay, we want to bring you onto campus, we want to give you a spot on our team? Do we at some point just see a more open negotiation is kind of to the highest bidder or similar to the highest bidder? What we kind of see in terms of NFL free agency, NBA, MLB. Are we seeing the NFLization, I should say, of college sports as we know it? Now, I am, for one, and I want to make sure I get this out before I get into my next point. I hate the NCAA almost as anybody. Especially now that we get into this era of NIL. It's a tragedy still that several years later, many of the things that Reggie Bush did during his time at USC that ultimately caused him to have his Heisman Trophy removed now is legal under NIL rules, and the NCAA can't enforce said rules. So we're starting to see a process of really the NFLization of college football. And I'm not just talking about NIL either, in terms of almost a bargaining of, I'll go to your school for X amount of dollars from the student athlete perspective. We've also starting to see this in terms of the college football playoff. We've seen what's going on with the college football playoff. We haven't even seen how the 12-team playoff is going to play out. Who knows how the 12-team playoff is going to play out, but there's already talks on the 14-team playout as well. And it just makes you wonder, how broken does college football have to get before we get meaningful reforms, we get meaningful changes in terms of, I guess, finding yourselves on this peripheral of being in a much more stable place, not just from a college coach's perspective, but from an athletic director's perspective, from a student athlete's perspective, just more stability for everyone involved. And it just makes you wonder from that particular sense, because I, for one, I have always been a supporter for student athletes being paid. I remember the time when, I know he's not a college football player, Zion Williamson was at Duke. Duke had a big game against North Carolina at Duke in Durham, and you'll have a absolutely packed house. It's usually a packed house for Duke basketball, but particularly for this particular game, you have NBA athletes, you have a former president of the United States coming through and watching the game as well. Lots of stars watching this young man. And yet it was before the time of NIL, and he hardly saw any money that he generated from that university, any of the hype that he created while he was at that college level. So Zion hardly saw a dime of all of the revenue that was generated from this time. So I'm always been a supporter of that, because I think student athletes should always have a piece of the pie, or at least so to speak. But now that we get to this point of NIL, we're seeing really Pandora's box being opened up. We get to a point of will we see the NCAA dissolve at this point? Because think of it from the NCAA's perspective. What are they getting out of the relationship? It's starting to turn into a one-sided relationship. Now, for some of you that are watching this right now, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what is the point of the NCAA? And so why would these schools cooperate with the NCAA at any point in the first place? And that's a really good question. So the purpose of the NCAA is not only is it a centralized body in terms of governing college athletics, not an effective one. I think we all realize that it's never been an effective body for governing collegiate athletics, especially at that highest echelons of collegiate athletics, that higher division one, so to speak. Your more name brand schools that you think of off the top of your head when you think of college football, for example. But let's say Johnny at Vanderbilt, hurts himself during a college football game, and his family ends up suing the university for maybe not taking care of him down the line. Well, instead of Vanderbilt's Warriors being utilized and defending the university, the NCAA would step in and be that shield against any liability that happens while you are participating in college athletics. So that's what member schools get by being a part of the NCAA. And they still get that. However, we've seen the NCAA. Well, what is the NCAA even getting out of this at this point? We're at a point now where they can't enforce two-time transfer rules. They can't enforce NIL. And it makes you wonder, what can they actually enforce? And can they enforce anything that's even remotely, I would say, meaningful, right? So it makes you wonder from that standpoint. We've seen these losses pile up in court. And in response, we've seen NIL related laws go into place, such as in Oregon, at least is like working through the chain. NCAA is not going to give up this fight. It wants to retain as much power as humanly possible. But as we're moving into a new era, unless Congress does end up stepping in and they actually give the NCAA an exemption on what could possibly go ahead and be a monopoly, because that's part of the reason why they lost, is that Congress has not given NCAA monopoly status. That's one of the reasons why they have lost in course. So it's an interesting story to keep an eye on. How does the NCAA respond? Can they find a way to remain relevant, or is it the end of the NCAA as we know it? It's something to really watch out for. I know this is not going to be the end of us of watching over this. There's going to be more. There is certainly going to be more coming down that pipeline. But speaking of coming down that pipeline, however, Group of Five, there's been a lot going on down at the Group of Five level. The Group of Five level has been having some interesting churn in what some would call a lower part of upper Division One football, Division One football, including the FBS and the FCS. Then within the FBS, you got your Power Four and your Group of Five. There's a lot going on down at the Group of Five right now. One of the things that's going on down at the Group of Five level is that we saw a very sudden departure by Sean Elliott. We talked about this on the last podcast. So Sean Elliott's left. Sean Elliott is no longer the head football coach at Georgia State. He moved on. He is taking on a positional coaching position at South Carolina. So late in the coaching carousel, Georgia State was suddenly in need of a head coach once again. And we find ourselves, where does Georgia State end up going? And we gave a few thoughts on the previous podcast. Well, ever since we got to that point in terms of who is going to be that new head coach, Well, one did end up getting named, and they actually end up getting named shortly after we recorded the last podcast, oddly enough. So we found Dell McGee. Dell McGee is going to be your new head football coach at Georgia State. Now, at first, I was not very familiar with his game. I actually did have to go ahead and Google who this man actually was because I wasn't too terribly sure. As someone that's spent time in the Midwest, and there's a reason why I haven't heard of him. It's because, he primarily has spent his time down south and specifically in the state of Georgia. And the more that I read about this guy, the more that I fell in love with the prospect of him being a head football coach at the college football level in the state of Georgia. Now, technically, this is not going to be his first time head coaching. He actually was an interim head coach back in 2015 when Georgia Southern went to the Go Daddy Bowl. He was in charge, and his guys ended up winning in the Go Daddy Bowl. But what about Dell McGee since then? Well, he spent some time in a bunch of different places, actually. While this would actually be his first legitimate opportunity to have a gig as a head coach at the FBS level, he knows the state of Georgia. First of all, the man has been born and raised in Georgia. He grew up in Columbus, Georgia. He ended up going to Auburn. So, born and bred down here in the South. Ends up having a decent little NFL career. Went back and forth between the NFL and a couple of other leagues, played corner. So, he's had decent NFL success, right? But then after his playing days came to an end, he ends up going back into Georgia. He was a DB's coach at Harris County. He's defensive coordinator at Greenville High School. That's also down in Georgia. And then after some time spent at Carver Columbus as a grad assistant, also happens to be in Columbus, Georgia, by the way, he spent some time at the college football level and also down south. He was an analyst at Auburn at his alma mater, was there for a year. And then, of course, he was at Georgia Southern, was a running backs coach at Georgia, was a run game coordinator for the Georgia Bulldogs, where during his time there, they won multiple national championships. They won multiple SEC titles to go with that as well. Fun fact, when he was an analyst in 2013, Auburn won the SEC too. So this is a very accomplished coach as an RB, as a running backs coach, as a high school coach. And I think what's extremely important, especially if you are a smaller program like Georgia State, you got to have a pipeline in your home state and in your surrounding area. And Dell McGee has that because he spent his entire life in Georgia, born and bred in Georgia, mind you. Dell McGee knows Georgia. He's coached at the high school level, so he has good relationships with many of the high school coaches in Georgia. And you'll possibly see some maybe slightly more high-profile players go to Georgia, particularly if they're running backs. Because those high school running backs in Georgia, they know about Dell McGee. They know about Dell McGee for sure. So he knows Georgia like the back of his hand. I think he has a good demeanor. I really like his character personally. And one thing that I've always said, for multiple coaching hires across the board, whether we're talking about, the UCLA hire that happened earlier this year. If you're going to be a first-time head coach, it makes sense that you go out, you get yourself some experienced coordinators, and oh, baby, he got some experienced coordinators, all right. He actually picks up Jim Chaney to go and be the offensive coordinator at Georgia State, a guy that has a lot of existence. He's been coaching college football since 1985. He has been around college football for an extraordinarily long time. Actually was an offensive coordinator at Tennessee, interim head coach at Tennessee, also has OC experience at Arkansas, Pittsburgh, Georgia, back to Tennessee again. He's been around. He knows a thing or two about being an offensive play caller. So right off the gate, Del McGee makes a fantastic hire, in my opinion, for the offensive coordinator spot. So he will have experienced assistants around him that he trusts. And he also is from Georgia. So I know some people don't like to say the word fit a lot, but for Del McGee particularly, I think the fit absolutely works in terms of Georgia State's new head coach. I'm excited. I'm excited to see what Del McGee can do in year number one. And remember, this is not a bad program at all. This is a solid football program in the Sun Belt. We have seen, actually, now that I think about it, Georgia State, they are just coming off of a bowl win. They just won the famous Idaho Potato Bowl, guys. This is not like a poverty program by any means. This is not one of those you're taking over a 1-11, 0-12 type school. No, there's some talent here. And you have a good recruiting base working from the state of Georgia. A lot of talent in that state of Georgia. Even if Georgia can come in and get their best guys, maybe Georgia Tech to a lesser degree, Georgia State, there's still plenty of talented players in Georgia that would love to play college football. I can tell you that. So, that being said, really love the Del McGee hiring. I'm curious to see what he does here in year number one, but I think Georgia State fans, I think I would be excited if I was a Georgia State fan. That's for sure. And speaking of that excitement, oh baby, we got some more excitement, not just in the Sun Belt, baby. We also have excitement happening in the MAC. Did I see this right? The MAC? The MAC is expanding? Oh, you heard those words absolutely correct. Yes, there will be expansion of the MAC conference. And guess who's gonna come on back? The UMass Minutemen. They are going to end their hiatus from the MAC. They spent some time as an independent. They reinstated their college football program back in 2012, and when they did that, they were in the MAC for a few years. Now, they were never a legitimate competitor in the MAC by any means, but UMass went to be an independent and realized that, hey, maybe the grass is not always greener, striking out on your own. And so we get the news. We will have a 13th team in the MAC. UMass has been invited to join the MAC as a new member today. The Minutemen did end up accepting, and they are set to join the MAC in all sports. Not just football, but for all sports across the board, starting the 2025-2026 season. So you're not going to see UMass in the MAC this upcoming season, but down the road, a former MAC school coming on home. I mean, you just absolutely love to see that for the Minutemen, getting a conference affiliation for their football program. They were just not striking it out as a brand or a team on the field as an independent. So seeing them come back into the fold, into this MAC conference, I think that's going to be beneficial for their brand. One of the more lovable brands in college football, and also joining a conference where UMass is going to be more competitive. They're not going to have as difficult of a schedule as what they had to navigate through in years past once they joined the MAC. So seeing them win more games is going to also help them build the brand from that standpoint. And also the MAC is it's a lovable brand. Everybody loves some action midweek. And I've so love the move for UMass. And that's not all. Oh, we're not even done yet here, guys. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we did end up seeing UMass join, but that puts the MAC at 13 teams. Now, the MAC is moving away from what we saw in terms of the divisional mindset, so it doesn't hurt as much. But when you have an odd number of teams in your conference, it does create some unforeseen scheduling headaches. So there was some speculation at first on who that 14th team could be. Well, Kyle Rodwin, he works for the Toledo Blade. I'll try to get his tweet up on screen if I actually remember it. There's some sources out there that says that there's continuing to be mutual interest between the MAC and Western Kentucky. So we could very well see Western Kentucky be that 14th team. And I think that also makes a lot more sense for Western Kentucky. First and foremost, their football program. I don't think there will be any adjustments to their football program per se, because Western Kentucky is already one of the best football programs in Conference USA right now. Well, even when they go to the MAC, Western Kentucky, they're not going to come in and be a brand new guest. Of course, this has not been confirmed. Western Kentucky has not officially joined the MAC. There's just some sources out there saying that it could happen, that there's a likely chance that could happen. I would say greater than 50%. Not guaranteed, though. Weird things have happened before. But Western Kentucky, they want to be saying hi to everybody in the MAC and then go into the back of the bus. Likewise, Western Kentucky would actually step in and be at the front of the bus. Actually, towards the front of the bus, I would argue that Western Kentucky would be the best program, not just the best team, but the best program in the MAC if they chose to go down that road. You can make the argument that they're one of the best programs in Conference USA right now. But what's different between being in Conference USA and being in the MAC, one, the conference is a lot more stable. You hardly hear about teams actually wanting to move away from the MAC. It's a rarity, an absolute rarity that it happens. You don't see the type of changes that you see from, say, the American or Conference USA or even the Sun Belt as well. There's a lot more continuity in the MAC. It's just made up of teams that, maybe don't have a lot of ambitions to play at a higher level of collegiate athletics. They love where they are. They love the continuity and the camaraderie. The MAC is a very stable place. And that's just something that you can't say about Conference USA. I mean, the Conference USA has been rated as of recently. This time last year, we actually did not know if the Conference USA was going to survive. Now, Conference USA is doing its best, bringing up some certain teams from the FCS, but, even with those additions, you could argue that the Conference USA is effectively on that life support still. So, more stability in the MAC. So, this is why I think it really makes sense for Western Kentucky to make that transition from Conference USA to the Mid-American Conference. Likewise, Western Kentucky would not have to travel as much for conference games. And that's just not for football. This is for all sports combined. Many of the teams that Western Kentucky will play up against in the MAC are actually in neighboring states. So the vast majority of teams that Western Kentucky would play against in their new conference are in Ohio, are in Indiana as well. The farthest drive that Western Kentucky would go would be maybe Buffalo, possibly. But even then, it's a much more reasonable journey from a logistical standpoint than, say, Western Kentucky having to go to multiple different time zones, by the way, to go play a conference game. I mean, New Mexico State is not a short trip from Bowling Green, Kentucky. It's not like that at all. So more continuity, more stability in the MAC. They would still be arguably a top dog in that conference as well versus where they are right now in Conference USA. Plus, in addition, you save money. You save money on travel, and you're able to maintain other athletic programs much more easily than if you had to send non-revenue earning sports across the country for a conference matchup. So I really like this move for Western Kentucky if they ended up going down that path. But likewise, the second thought that I had when I saw that particular tweet, is who could Conference USA target to possibly replace Western Kentucky? Now, Kennesaw State, they're coming to the FBS. They're going to be in Conference USA this year. Delaware starting next year. Delaware next year will be in Conference USA. So if nobody left, there's 10 teams in Conference USA, but likely Western Kentucky is leaving. So you get back to this point where you have an odd number of teams once again in your conference. So now it begs the question, okay, who could I possibly go after next that could re-injuvenate our numbers in Conference USA, but also make geographical sense? Now, Conference USA is all over the place. So when I was first researching like some of these schools that they could reach out to, there's actually quite a few schools that could, feed the bill. But, I'm looking for programs that not only has had success at the FCS level, but is at least getting comparable talent acquisition at the FBS level as well. Because you're bringing in a team that's not even bringing in FBS caliber talent, it's going to take that school a while to get going. And I don't know if Conference USA has time for that. So looked at some schools that maybe would be more prepared to make that jump to the Conference USA today. And so I'm going to go from 3 to 2. There was 3 schools that I ultimately identified. One of those schools being Nichols. Used to be called Nichols State back in NCAA 06, but now it's the Nichols Colonels. Nichols Colonels, they partake in the Southland Conference, and they've been in the Southland Conference for quite some time, from 1991 to today. So they've been part of the Southland Conference from quite some time. And they're also one of the more notable programs in terms of FCS playoff appearances. They have made 7 FCS playoff appearances, 4 of those happening in the last decade. So with it being a little bit more difficult to get into the FCS playoffs with the automatic bid system, Nichols State able to get in 7 times, particularly in a league where typically the Southland is only getting 1 bid. That's big. Also, right in the wheelhouse for some of the Conference USA teams as well. They're located right in the heart of Louisiana. And so because of that, you have teams like, for example, like Sam Houston, UTEP, Louisiana Tech are all in the vicinity. Kennesaw State is not too far either. So from a geographical fit standpoint, Nichols State, I guess now Nichols, would make some sense. They have continuity at the head coaching position at Tim Rabo. He's been around there for almost a decade now. Plus, they are getting talent at a roughly FBS level, at least in terms of like their roster composite, right? So Nichols could step up and compete right away at the FCS level if they wanted to do that. However, I will say that there's probably 2 more programs that would make even more sense. How about the Furman Paladins? The Furman Paladins could also make a lot of sense as well. Now, the Furman Paladins, they have been entrenched in the Southern Conference for an extremely long time. The Furman Paladins have been part of the Southern Conference, the SoCon, since 1936. That is way before World War II. So it's been a while since Furman has went ahead and sponsored a conference realignment type move. But they do have a national championship on their resume. They won the FCS national championship late in the 1980s against Georgia Southern, ironically, who's now at that FBS level. They are coming off of a conference championship, which did lead them into the playoffs. They made it to the second round, the quarterfinals of the FCS playoffs, losing in overtime to Montana. Montana, one of the top programs in the country. Furman also located in a great spot, Greenville, South Carolina, down in the South. You got Liberty in somewhat close vicinity, as well as Mid-Tennessee State, Kennesaw State, FIU isn't too far either. So Furman would not have to do a significant amount of travel at all. And just like what we mentioned with Nichols, they also have an FBS caliber roster that would allow them maybe not dominate Conference USA, but they would at least be competitive in Conference USA if they choose to make the jump. That being said, it's been almost 100 years since Furman has left, so certainly questionable if they would do this. But if they had aspirations to go to that highest level of Division I football, I think Furman could particularly jump on this opportunity. And they would also be, I believe they would be the only group of 5 team in South Carolina. Well, besides Coastal Carolina. But there's not a lot of group of 5 programs in South Carolina. So there might be a market for Furman if they wanted to go about doing that. But at number 1, I think this will be the top target for Conference USA. If Western Kentucky actually does end up leaving, and that's the Eastern Kentucky Colonels. Now, this would replace that Kentucky blueprint that would be left behind by the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. And Eastern Kentucky is one of the most illustrious programs in the FCS. They have 22 playoff appearances. They have multiple national titles at the FCS level. They also have that FBS caliber roster. They could compete reasonably in Conference USA, and they would be smack dab in the middle. Now, Eastern Kentucky, while they would have to do a lot of traveling, so maybe that wouldn't help them too terribly much. They got Mid-Tennessee State nearby. Liberty is not going to be too terribly far either. Got a lot of schools out in that southern part of the country that Eastern Kentucky would primarily travel to. And the conference that they're in right now is not too terribly stable, not in the slightest. You know, we see they were in the Ohio Valley for so long, but then they were part of the ASUN WAC Challenge in 21. Then they were in the ASUN completely in 2022. That's merged with the United Athletic Conference for this year. So Eastern Kentucky, they've been through a lot. They've had quite a bit going on. I think they might be tired of, if they're going to go through all of this realignment for a conference, why not get onto a bigger stage? I would argue that the Conference USA has a bigger brand than the United Athletic Conference. And who's to say the United Athletic Conference would actually stand on its 10 toes long term? Because it could very well disappear. It could very well not be a long-term theme. So I think that would be your top 3 targets if the Conference USA needs to get another team from that FCS level. I think Eastern Kentucky is a top target. They would be my favorite if there were betting lines out there for this type of stuff. But Furman and also Nichols are 2 other FCS programs to keep an eye on. One more thing that I want to note, I did hear Tarleton State mentioned quite a bit when it comes down to, they could, they could be a good FBS target as well. I think they're a little bit overrated in terms of their appeal as of right now. Now, that's not to say Tarleton State would never be an FBS program. I just don't think the timing is right for them necessarily because they are just now finishing the transition process of being up to the FCS, moving up from Division II. So Tarleton State, we'll see how they handle FCS football now that they're going to be able to compete for a playoff spot here shortly. If they can maintain long-term success, over like a few years, then I'll definitely be all for it. But for Tarleton State, I don't think their time to move up is right now. At least not yet anyways. But with all this talk of the group of 5, let's keep it rolling to what has quickly become one of my favorite things to do here, and what some people would like to throw that O word around. I personally don't like to do that. I just say that we have this just a longer period of time before we have meaningful college football games to look forward to again. That's just kind of how I look at it. We're less than 6 months away though, so we're fighting through it. We're going to be strong. Speaking of being strong, you could show me some resiliency and strength by just doing a couple of things real fast. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, especially if you made it this far in the podcast. If you made it this far, first of all, you're a real MVP, but that would really help me out tremendously in terms of getting this podcast out to more college football fans like yourselves that maybe are a little bit more on that die-hard side. I would feel that you're probably a little bit more on that die-hard side if you happen to find my channel in any capacity, right? So, what has quickly become one of my favorite things to do is that we have ranked every single FBS program going into the 2024 season. Now, this is different from ranking the team. I'm talking about the state of programs for each FBS squad and doing so using free criteria. It's on-field success over the last 5 years. So if you have not won too many games, you're not going to be very high up on this list. Not every win counts the same. I go more in depth with that with the previous one. There'll probably be like some kind of card that you can click on if you want more context of that from the when we unveiled 121 through 134. We also take a look at your talent acquisition as well. What kind of players are you bringing in, not only through high school recruiting, but also through the transfer portal as well? What kind of caliber of player are you bringing into your program? And then finally, what is your stability and continuity at one of the most important aspects of a college football team, your head coach? Do you have the same head coach for more than a few years, or are you constantly rotating through college football head coaches? So we base these rankings on those three factors: on-field success, talent acquisition, and stability at the head coaching position. So last time out, we did 121 through 134. We unveiled those rankings. And now we're going to unveil a little bit more than that. We are going to unveil from 120 to 101. So we're rounding out the teams that are outside of that top 100. But before I do go into that too deep, though, I got an amazing question from one of you guys last night, actually. Brody hit me up on the YouTube channel asking if I did any research on Delaware. I'm interested to know where they would stack against current FBS teams if, pending their rise to the FBS in 2025. And I thought that was an awesome question. So I definitely wanted to cover that real quick. So for Delaware, Brody, and this is for you, my guy. I hope you're watching. So if Delaware was joining today, out of 135 teams, I would have Delaware at that 129 spot out of 135 teams. Now, Delaware is one of those teams that do have consistent FCS playoff success. They've been to multiple FCS playoffs the last 5 years. One thing that does hold them back and what they're going to have to prove is that can they get better in their talent acquisition? Because if they were to join the FBS today, their caliber of player that they're bringing in, either through the transfer portal or bringing in through high school recruiting, would be the worst in the FBS. And that would be the worst by a country mile. For concept, Delaware's average recruiting class, both high school recruiting and transfer portal combined over the last 5 years, has been tracking in the 190s, according to 247 Sports. So not only would they be in last in that regard, they would be in last by a country mile. Kennesaw State would be the next closest, but they were tracking in the 160s. They do also have a relatively new head coach that's been there for a couple of years. So Delaware, while they had good FCS playoff success, FCS and FBS are two different levels. It's a higher level of competition, so they could theoretically move up for sure if, one, they can prove that they can have success at the FBS level, and two, if they could also at the same time recruit a higher caliber of player. And moving up to a more high profile division level will certainly help out with that. No questions about it. They would also be the only team in the state of Delaware that would have an FBS squad. So they could lean into that as well, the first U.S. state. But to answer your question, Brody, I would have Delaware in that 129 range. I would have them ahead of UMass, but I would also have them behind Temple at the exact same time. So 129 out of 135 if they were to make the jump today. But now we get into what is that top 120? What is 120 through 101? What is that actually looking like? So, without further ado, we will jump right back into it. Part number 2. At 120, I have Sam Houston. Now, I'm sure a few of you guys would be surprised if I didn't have Sam Houston in that bottom 14. And when we talk about on-field success the last 5 years, what helps Sam Houston in this regard is that Sam Houston does have somewhat recent FCS playoff success prior to making that jump up to the FBS level. Back in 2020, they actually won a national championship at the FCS level. This was during that COVID season. And the COVID season could be seen with asterisks. You could do whatever you want, but all of those teams that competed at the FCS level had to deal with very similar things and had to deal with the similar adversity. So Sam Houston coming out on top of all of that is really a testament to what the current head coach of Sam Houston has in Casey Keeler. And this is also what helps Sam Houston out, even though their first season in the FBS was nothing to write home about. 3-9 is not anything to be too terribly excited about. And if it was just a more short-term thing, Sam Houston would be a little bit lower on this list. However, they do recruit at the higher level than any of the recent newcomers to the FCS. Jacksonville State, for example, Kennesaw State within their own conference, they recruit better than them, and they have continuity in Casey Keeler, who's been around for a longer period of time, so they have that continuity at the head coaching position. They just don't have that consistent on-field success yet at the FBS level. At 119, however, I have a team still in Conference USA, by the way, that has been around for just a little bit longer in terms of higher end Division I football, and that is New Mexico State. Now, New Mexico State has enjoyed a couple of years of success under Jerry Kill. Jerry Kill actually led the Aggies to their first 10-win season in a really long time. Since 1960, that was the last time that New Mexico State has won 10 games or more in a single season. But Jerry Kill is gone. He is no longer the head coach of the Aggies. He did step down from that position because of health reasons. So, and outside of Jerry Kill, New Mexico State has been that poverty program. So it's up to the Aggies to prove that they can maintain that level of success. And of course, trying to go about making sure that they're recruiting at a decent level. Whoever can New Mexico State do that? We'll just have to wait and see. But they are on their third coach in 5 years as well. Up next at 118, I have the Monarchs of Old Dominion. Old Dominion, a newer FBS program. They've been in the FBS since 2014. Old Dominion, on the other hand, they have a little bit more continuity than New Mexico State. But Old Dominion, they have not won a bowl game since 2016. They have not had a winning season since 2016 either. So this hurts Old Dominion in these particular rankings. They do recruit at a decent level, though, for a group of 5 school. They're tracking in the 110s, which is better than most of the teams that we have mentioned thus far. And their continuity is somewhat decent. They do have Ricky Ron still in charge of the program. He might be a little bit on that warm seat because he doesn't have that winning season as of right now. But Ricky Ron is, we'll see if this could be a possible breakout year for the Monarchs. For now, I have them at 118. After that, we'll keep it down in the Southwest for 117 because I do have the Wolfpack of Nevada. Now, Nevada is on their third coach now in the last five seasons. They have called upon Jeff Choate to be the new head coach of the Nevada Wolfpack. This is his first time being a head coach at the FBS level, but has some experience in playing high-level FBS football. He was the co-defensive coordinator for Texas, that Texas team that did make the college football playoff. It was one of the best defenses in the entire country. But a tall task lays ahead of him because in the last 2 years, Nevada has not won more than 2 games. It is a far cry than what they have accomplished under Jay Norvell, who then would later go on and go and do bigger and better things. Nevada also not recruiting at a terribly high level either. They are in the 110s as well. So Nevada is my 117 for those reasons. Speaking of Conference USA, we now go to Mid-Tennessee State. The Blue Raiders are now 116 in my rankings. Now, Mid-Tennessee State, they did say goodbye to Rick Stockstill. He was the longtime head coach. He was there since 2006. He was let go following this season. Middle Tennessee State, one of those more difficult places to win at. His recruiting classes are in the 114 range over the last 5 years, so their caliber of player is also not very high. They are also breaking in a new head coach in Derek Mason, who used to be the head coach of Vanderbilt, so he does know Tennessee well, but Mid-Tennessee State, not a very highly regarded program at the moment. At 115, I do have the Golden Flashes of Kent State. Now, Kent State, if we were just talking about last year, poverty program. Worst team in the country last year, but we're not ranking teams. We're ranking programs. And this team has, been devastated by the transfer portal, especially after Sean Lewis did leave Kent State to take a coordinator job at Colorado. Kenny Burns is there, was retained in spite of going 1-11. Has to be a proven year, has to have his team at a higher level this year if he does want to keep his job. Kent State also does not recruit very highly, in the 112s over the last 5 years in terms of average recruiting ranking. The MAC is looking for Kent State to get out of that doormat for sure. Following at 114, and this could come for a little bit of a surprise seeing this team early, South Alabama. South Alabama is here at 114. Now, I do want to say that many of these rankings, they were very razor-thin margins for sure. Absolutely razor-thin. Now, South Alabama does have a little bit more success overall than what we've seen from Kent State. They do recently have a 10-win season under Kane Warmack. But South Alabama is also on its third head coach in the last 5 years. Kane Warmack going to go and taking a coaching job at a different school. He's also an assistant, I believe, at a much bigger program. The name does escape me. They do have a new head coach in Major Applewhite. He was head coach at Houston for a few years, and he was okay. He wasn't great by any means. He was fine. 15-11 overall in his 2+ years at Houston. Has been doing other stuff since then. He was an analyst at Alabama. Actually was an internal hire, so he is familiar with the program. Coaching stability really has killed him. Also, their caliber of recruit that they're bringing in is also outside the top 100. Also in the Sun Belt at 114, I got Texas State. Texas State just made their first bowl game in program history. Texas State also winning their first bowl game in program history as well. They had their best season ever under G.J. Kinn and a respectable 8-5 record. But before that, this was not a program that was flying high. They were a doormat in the Sun Belt for the last 4 years. And yes, This season went really well for the Texas State Bobcats. It's now a matter of, can GJ Kinn maintain that longevity in terms of success in San Marcos, Texas. They have been playing pretty well in the portal. It is trending upward. Their caliber of player is still in that top 100. And Texas State has also went through a couple of coaches as well. At I believe 112. Am I losing count? Oh, okay. So it is 112. At 112, I got UNLV. UNLV, another one of those teams that had its best season in years. And I'm talking about in years. The last time that UNLV has won more than 9 games was 1984. I was not alive. I was not an idea when UNLV was that relevant. They have Barry Odom, and Barry Odom did stick around for right now, but they went through a couple of coaches before him over the past few years. Tony Sanchez, Marcus Arroyo, they were also in the doormat before that. So kind of the same circumstance as what we talked about with South Alabama. The difference between UNLV and Texas State, South Alabama, for example, is that UNLV does handle recruiting better. They bring in a higher caliber of player. They actually trend in the 90s compared to Texas State, South Alabama, who's outside of that top 100. So that's the biggest difference there. Moving on next, we got Bowling Green and the Bowling Green Falcons. This MAC team comes in at 111. Now, Bowling Green has had the same head coach over the last 5+ years. Scott Loafer, he's still here as the head coach. Actually, it's taken him to the Quick Lane Bowl the past couple of years. Bowling Green, one of those programs that doesn't have that high watermark. They don't have that high upside, being not only the little brother with Ohio State and Cincinnati in their backyard, but some would say this is not even the best MAC school, and rightfully so, in the state of Ohio. So they're not even the best G5 school in Ohio at the moment. So they have their work cut out for them for sure. They portal outside and recruit outside of the top 110. They just don't have a lot of upside, but that coaching continuity does help them out. Up next, I got the Charlotte 49ers coming in at 110. Now, Charlotte does not have the same level of success as what we have seen from Bowling Green. In the past 5 years, they have only been to one bowl game. That was in 2019 when they lost that Bahamas Bowl. Will Huey is gone. Biff Poggi is now in charge of this American program. And has some interesting things going on for its time, but Charlotte does not have any sort of success. They started their program 9 years ago. What does help Charlotte, however, is that they do recruit within that top 100, so their talent acquisition is better than most of the programs that we've already talked about. Charlotte does find itself here at 110 until they can have that consistent success. Speaking of teams that are looking for that consistent success, though, is the Rice Owls, and maybe they're starting to get that under Mike Bolgren. Mike Bolgren has been around since 2018, so they do have continuity. However, they haven't been that great, and maybe it's just a realization of them realizing who they are necessarily. They've been to 2 consecutive bowl games. They did lose both of those bowl games, so they have not had a winning season since 2014, when they did actually end up winning the Hawaii Bowl. Their recruiting is also not that great as well, outside of the top 100. But they do have that coaching continuity, which does allow them to be ahead of Charlotte. At 108, however, I have San Jose State, and shout out to Brent Brennan. Brent Brennan done an excellent job at San Jose State, and shout out to the San Jose State administration for being patient with this guy. I mean, his first 2 seasons there, he went 3-22, could have easily pulled the plug after that, but they stuck with him and it worked out. They made bowl games in 3 of their last 4 seasons. However, Brent Brennan is no longer there, and that hurts them in this particular ranking. The former Navy head coach Ken Natolo, who was at Navy for an extremely long time. He's now the new head coach at San Jose State, so he does have group of five experience and knows how to get to conference championship games at the group of five level. San Jose State, however, does not bring in a very high caliber player at all, outside of that top 100 as well. So that hurts San Jose State. They are at 108. Following San Jose State, we got the Hurricanes of Tulsa. The Golden Hurricanes do come in at 107. They have a relatively new head coach in Kevin Wilson, which from some of the comments that I saw on Twitter, seems like Kevin Wilson is not a big NIL guy. So not as high on him, but it is what it is. He is part of the American Conference, though. And his team does recruit at that 106. So that is slightly higher than what we've seen from San Jose State. So that's why they're ahead of San Jose State. They have not had a winning season in the past couple of years. Their 2020 and 2021 seasons do lift them up to a degree. After that, we got 106, and I got Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern, another relatively new program in the FBS. They were there since 2014. That was their first FBS season, and relatively successful in terms of getting to bowl games. They have actually been to bowl games 4 of the last 5 seasons. So the on-field success is actually solid. What does hold back Georgia Southern, in like many of programs on this list, is that they bring in a not very high caliber of player outside of that top 100. They've also have gone through a couple of coaches. Clay Helden is only in his 3rd year and has not yet turned in a winning season. Following Georgia Southern, I got Ball State coming in at 105. Ball State, another one of those programs, kind of like the Bowling Green of Indiana. They know who they are, and it's a solid program. They have a longtime head coach in Mike Neal, who's been there since 2016, been to a couple of bowl games of recent, the COVID year, which actually they were ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season. Fun fact of the day. But ever since that COVID year, they have not been able to post a winning season. Obviously, they do also struggle with bringing in quality players as well, which does hold them back. One team that doesn't have that same exact excuse, though, is Louisiana Tech, and they come in here at 104. So they bring in a much, I wouldn't say much higher, but certainly a higher caliber of player than what Ball State brings in, because they are in a richer environment. However, they have not been able to capitalize off of that. They have not had a winning season since 2019, so that was before COVID. They are now on their 2nd head coach in Sonny Cumbie, who might be on the hot seat as he's posted 2 consecutive 3-9 season as well. So lots to prove for Louisiana Tech in a weakened Conference USA. And even though I'm saying these things about Louisiana Tech, ironically, we have them as the 3rd best program in Conference USA. We just started this series last week, so it just gives you an idea of really a lot of programs in Conference USA trying to go and prove themselves. Same could also be said for Eastern Michigan, who I have at 103. Now, Eastern Michigan has made constant bowl appearances in the last 5 years. For their last 5 years, they've been in bowl games. They have not been able to necessarily win those bowl games, most notably that 68 Ventures Bowl that ended in a blowout, and then their guys ended up in a fight. Not a good look at all. What's also not a good look is their ability to recruit. They really can't recruit. They're outside of the top 100. And yeah, they don't really have any big-time wins either. They also, finish with a losing season as well. So Eastern Michigan, they're an okay program in the MAC, but not much from home to report from that aspect. 102. I got the University of Southern Mississippi out in the Sun Belt. Now, USM has not had the upside of the last 5 years. They've only had 2 winning seasons in the past 5 years, been to a couple of bowl games. They've also had a couple of different coaches. Jay Hobson was there for a little bit, and then Will Hall is going to be in his 4th year. Interesting to see how Will Hall does with primarily his players in this 4th season as the head coach of Southern Miss. They do recruit as a reasonably high level. They are just outside the top 90 when it comes to talent acquisition, when accounting for both the transfer portal and also accounting for high school recruiting as well, which is especially important at the group of 5 level. And rounding out your group for now at 101, I got the Chippewas of Central Michigan. Now, Central Michigan does get the benefit of having that head coaching continuity because Jim McEwen, he's been there since 2019. He's going into his 6 seasons, led the Chippewas to a couple of bowl games. So even though they don't recruit at the same level as Southern Miss, the coaching continuity does push them ahead of the Golden Eagles because of that. They also have had slightly more success on the field as well. Unlike Southern Miss, they have posted 2 wins of 8 wins or more during the last 5 years. So that's why I have Central Michigan at 101. But this does round out my group 4 right now of 101 through 120. I'm curious, man. Was there names? Was there a particular program that surprised you that's down this low or you're disappointed with? Let me know your comments for sure down below. And as well as let me know like what program you expected to be down here, but haven't necessarily seen yet in terms of what some would call poverty programs. But we are starting to get to a point where we are starting to get our voice a little bit tired. And so we are going to finish it up here tonight. Next time out, I am going to dive deeper into these FBS program rankings. We will be in that top 100 in the next podcast. We'll have 81 through 100, as well as some other things, college football, to definitely look into as well. So you look for that in the next podcast. But in the meantime, if you made it this far, as Kevin Durant would always say, you the real MVP, man. You are absolutely the real MVP. And because of you're the real MVP, you know what real MVPs do? They hit that like button. They hit that subscribe button as well. If you're an A1 since day one and you have a real chance to do that, we're not a very big channel as well. So you could be a real OG in this community. But with that being said, this is the Any Given Saturday podcast where anything could happen on any given Saturday. I'm your host, Jake, getting ready to sign off, but I hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.